Hi, everyone, and welcome to another Scientology Outside of the Church podcast. This is season 11, episode 10 already. I'm here with Quentin Stroud. Arthur has the night off, and we're going to do a little bit of a editorial podcast that I think really needs to be spoken about. Might not be one of our best listened to podcasts, given the history of these types of things. But sometimes things need to be communicated. And this one's going to be about applying the technology and seeing that the technology is correctly applied of Scientology and Dianetics, independent Scientology and Dianetics, the subjects, and some things that occurred over the weekend in communication cycles that I had made me think that this would be a really important podcast to have. And Quentin has been gracious enough to do the podcast with me. How are you, Quentin?
Yeah, I'm doing fantastic. I think this is a really good um, kind of like check in to make sure that those who are operating in the independent Scientology field really are keeping the technology working in the field with our public, with the people who we work with, in our lives even, because I think that is very, very important. And like Ellery said, you know it is correct. Number three, knowing it is correct. And so when you have it and you know it's correct, you gotta apply it. So let's talk about it.
Right. And that comes from keeping Scientology working, number one, from 1965. The policy that
Correct.
is at the beginning of all the pro course check sheets. And for the reason that, well, we have this technology, one, having the correct technology. Okay, if you're in the independent field and you're an independent Scientologist, you wouldn't be doing it if you didn't have the correct technology, right? It stands to reason. If you weren't and you were out of the subject of Scientology and out of the church and out of independent Scientology, then you felt like you didn't have the correct technology. Next, probably one of the most important things is knowing the technology and knowing it is correct. Three, and four, teaching correctly the correct technology, which are right before what this podcast is about. So knowing the technology, knowing it is correct. If you're in the independent field and you know Scientology works and you've gotten something from it, or you've delivered it to somebody, you know that it works and they've gotten something from it, you want to keep using it. Stands to reason, right?
Right.
So teaching correctly the correct technology. Well, that's a trickier one in the independent field. We do our very best in our online course room.
Mhm.
There are other individuals, not many, but there are a couple who have standard course rooms, brick and mortar course rooms. We're the only one with a virtual course room, uh, and you need to be able to teach it correctly. But this podcast assumes that if you've been in Scientology for I don't know, a few years to a few decades, and you've gotten up the bridge, you have most likely gotten the correct technology taught to you, or you still wouldn't be using it. I think that's sort of a given.
Mhm.
Now, that brings us to applying the technology. And the reason why I wanted to do this
My
podcast,
favorite.
yeah, the reason why I wanted to do this podcast is it was brought to my attention that the behaviors of certain individuals in the independent field, I'm not going to name any names, and this is a broad brush. And if you say, "Oh, he's using a generality," these are observed behaviors by people that I have spoken to, or on one degree of separation from somebody that I've spoken. And I saw behaviors that made me think, okay, why is it that when someone has something that needs to be handled, if they have the correct technology, why aren't they using it to resolve whatever it is that it either is bothering them or they think is an out point, uh, that type of thing.
Mhm.
So why aren't people applying it correctly to resolve
Well,
problems?
sure, sure. Well, LRH says in the actual policy letter, Keeping Scientology Working, he says the common denominator of a group is the reactive bank. Things without banks have different responses. They only have their banks in common. They agree then only on bank principles. Okay? So, so if there's a group that is not working and applying this technology, knowing it's correct, knowing it works, and all the one through four, and then you get down to 5 and 6, applying the technology and seeing the technology is correctly applied. That's all. Like that really is the crux of it. Like literally, it's right dead center in the 10 points, 5 and 6. Like the crux of it all is applying the technology and seeing that the technology is correctly applied. So anything going wrong, any outpoints, any issues, anything that needs to be handled or matters that need to be handled in life as independent Scientologists, it would make sense that we go straight to the crux of what this technology can do. Applying the technology, number 5, and seeing that the technology is correctly applied across the board in our lives, in people's lives. Let me tell you something. I use this technology in every aspect of my life.
Mhm.
I use it in my business. I use it in my relationship, in my 2Ds. I use it in all the flows of my life. And I make sure that I'm doing this because I know this technology. I know it correctly, and I make sure I apply it in what I do. To me, that's it.
Right. Right. I
And
mean,
if one is not doing it, to answer your question, is because we're dealing with group bank.
right. Now, it's I've seen this for years where, and Pierre Ethier, uh, the late Pierre Ethier, the class 12, in Newmarket, Toronto, he once told me, he said one of the things that he saw was one of the biggest problems in the church was that there were these cliques of people where you had the Commodore's messenger org. They were better than everybody else, than the common Sea Org members and stuff like that, and they didn't get along with other groups. And I thought, how in the world does that still happen in in Scientology with this reference? How in the world does that happen? How can there be cliques? And when I was on staff, I came to realize, and I was as still a teenager when I joined staff. I came to realize that politics was alive and well in the corporate Church of Scientology, which I was a part of at the time. And I thought, how is that possible? How is there any form of politics within the subject of Scientology? And it all came back down to what you just said: group bank agreement.
Yeah, yeah. He goes on to say that thus each one of us, because he talks about the difference between group bank and an individual's bank, and how the individual, it says, can think. It says an individual must rise above an avid craving for agreement from a humanoid group. So even though we're spiritual beings, even though we're operating thetans or whatever, there's still this humanoid group, and it says an avid craving for agreement from this humanoid group, right? And so this is how these mobs and these cliques actually happen. He says that thus each one of us can rise above the domination of the bank, and then as a group of freed beings achieve freedom and reason. It is only the aberrated group, the mob, that is destructive.
Mhm.
I think this is brilliant. And I love the fact, like this one policy letter, like if you really get this in and see how it applies to every aspect of your life, you will start to see like, oh, where did I go into agreement with the humanoid with the humanoid group?
Yeah. Well, and it becomes it quickly becomes a witch hunt in
Mhm.
these group bank agreements. There's a set of lyrics from the song Witch Hunt from Moving Pictures from the Canadian band Rush that came out in about 1980. And Neil Peart, the drummer, wrote the lyrics for the band. He has passed on about 5, 6 years ago. But he says, quick to judge, quick to anger, slow to understand. Ignorance and prejudice, they walk hand in hand.
Wow.
Yeah,
Hmm.
that's pretty powerful, and that's what you see in these cliques is you get this witch hunt where you get this group bank agreement going on based off of nobody actually trying to find the correct why on something that's going on because the agreement is much more salacious and feeds that bankiness where
Right.
instead of looking into something and handling it, you are biased towards another group or individual without going, hang on, wait a minute, what's what's really going on here? And
Right.
to me, this is the major why that we tried to address in one of the past podcasts about the independent field being a group of individuals, not being a third dynamic group.
Mm. Hmm.
And that's why the independent field is stagnant, shrinking. Why people left the corporate church of Scientology is because they saw the same thing happening there. How can
The
we
mob.
ex- yeah, how can we expect to ever have this technology in place for any length of time? I mean, if you look at the number of highly trained auditors who were trained by LRH, almost all, almost all of them have died
Yeah.
that are in the independent field, save a couple, and
Hmm.
they're all getting up in years. So you have to look at it and go, okay, so how are we supposed to keep this around? I turned 57 this month, and
Hmm.
applying the technology, seeing that the technology is correctly applied, you can. One of the things I've also mentioned in past podcasts is policy and tech both are only as good as you can get a an analytical agreement that yes, this is what works and yes, this is what we will apply. Otherwise, you've got one gal or one guy or a small group of guys working in that direction. And the rest of them go off and do auditing, quote unquote, auditing, making up new processes, auditing, quote unquote, without a meter, and so on and so forth. And then you just go far off to the left and you're not applying the technology. You're seeing that the technology is correctly applied. You're doing incorrect application or worse. You're calling it
Mm.
one thing and not another. You ran into that before you came to AOGP.
Yeah.
There's
That
been
was a part of that was a part of my research, and I really I wanted LRH Tech, original LRH Tech, and that's the part of the reason why I went on my search. Part of the reason too was I was traveling, and so I wanted something that could allow me to do remote auditing, and I wanted something that allowed me to be on course, remotely, and I wanted to make sure it was green on white LRH Tech. I wanted to make sure it was real,
right.
and and in my research, I hit places and spaces that didn't necessarily offer all of those things, right? And that wasn't until I found you and in communicating with you and you showing me the college, you showing me how we do remote auditing. We talked about it extensively, so forth and so on. And I wanted to work um with a very upstat individual in order to help me, go up the bridge
Mhm.
because it wasn't about the group think. It wasn't about, that whole thing. It was about who is really here to make to help me. And that's what I needed.
Right. And so applying the technology and correctly applying it are super important if we ever expect to have any semblance of the correct technology in the future. And there has to be agreement on it, and there has to be application of it, and not just this group bank agreement of you're going to talk to so and so. Huh. That's really interesting because what is
List them up.
yeah, fundamentals of thought, when in doubt communicate. Dianetics 55.
Hmm.
When in doubt,
Right.
communicate. I mean, this is the fabric of Dianetics and Scientology and independent Scientology. What in the world
Right.
is going on where people? It's as if they just set the technology aside when they hear some sort of end theta thing or something they don't like or they don't agree with, and then they just completely drop out what it is that they say that they are being, doing, and having. It just blows
Hmm.
my mind how this sort of thing can
Yeah.
occur. And this is why we have to have independent Scientology, because it was happening in the corporate church. It is happening in the corporate church. And you get into the independent Scientology, and it's as far as I'm concerned, it's almost worse because there's nobody there to hold the line because you can't get any agreement on what it is that you're going to apply or that you're going to apply it, or even, what the correct technology is. I have so many people come to me that don't know how to do a clay demo of all things. They don't know how to properly do a clay demo. And I think to myself, how is it that somebody didn't catch that? And then I go,
Somewhere. Yeah.
wait a minute. This is the only answer to this, is that the person that trained them on this didn't know how to do it themselves or was lazy and didn't care, and they just let them do whatever. So you're not
Hmm.
applying the technology correctly. It's there. We have it. It's not just with AOGP. It's there. Lots of people have this. But yet
They
they
still have to
don't,
want to apply it.
they still have to want to apply it, which goes back to what I was saying of you have to have agreement. You don't just pick and choose. That's why he wrote Keeping Scientology Working, is it isn't just cherry picking these particular things and going off and doing whatever you want. Because guys like you and me and the people at AOGP, we have to sit here and pick through and clean up the wreckage when people have been mishandled.
Yeah.
And that's
Is it
a huge burden for the people that have received it, and an even larger burden for us to try and correct, because these people didn't know they were delivered to improperly in the first place.
right?
They don't know that they don't know, which is the opposite of the definition of Scientology.
Yeah. And he goes on to talk about this when he talks about the bank agreement. And he says that the bank agreement has been what has made Earth a hill. And if you were looking for hell and found Earth, it will certainly serve. And when you said that the other day, I cracked up because I was like, yep, that sure is it. And he says that is the bank. That is the bank. And that it is the bank that says the group is all and the individual nothing,
There you have
right?
it.
It is the bank that says that, like, that we got it. We know what we're talking about, and the individual, nope. Like, no, like it's about freeing these individuals like yourselves that's listening to this podcast, and then from that freed state, you create a group of freed beings that achieve freedom and reason. Is how he says it. Well, what is freedom and reason? Like, it has to make sense.
Right.
You know, it has to work. It has to make sense, and that's why I think this conversation is so important, because when we're talking about applying the technology, we're talking about applying it to life. I talk about this very, very passionately because I know how it's changed my health. I know how it's changed my body. I know how it's changed my finances. I know how it's changed my relationships. I know how it's worked. And so I'm not just reading this policy letter saying, oh, it's a good policy letter to follow. I'm saying it because I know how it works. And
Right.
if you apply the technology, you will see the results in a group, in a business, in whatever. And so when these things are not in, then you fall into that other thing that he talked about, that destructive element that messes people up.
Yeah. And part of what we're trying to do here is the latter part of these 10 steps in keeping Scientology working is hammering out of existence incorrect technology and knocking out incorrect applications, closing the door on any possibility of incorrect technology, closing the door on incorrect application. Well, all we can do is say, all right, if you know this, don't just apply it to others. It's the one thing, and the sorest point of all the points that I've seen is where people can have it done to them, but they don't do it to others. It's just a void. And if you don't apply it to others, but you expect it to be applied to you, what do you have? It kind of cancels itself out, doesn't it?
Hmm.
And so
Yeah.
you got Zippo. And that's why the independent field is the way that it is, and that's why the corporate Church of Scientology was so easily taken over. Well, that and the lack of confront for evil, and that these things could ever possibly happen. Um,
Mm.
but you've gotta be able to confront evil and go, okay, uh, I have a huge button on injustice. I've always been for the underdog. What about them? What's going on with them? Find out what's going on with them. Is it something that they're doing, or they just being created a pariah, or do they have some misunderstoods that somebody failed to fix, or that type of a thing. And I get really angry when I see injustice occurred, and I'm not even talking about to myself, but to other people. And part of the reason we opened AOGP and wanted to do something about it, when LRA says, at the end of the day, what did you do to help? What did you do to help on the third dynamic? And on the third dynamic, doing something to help means applying the technology, knowing about it, learning it, getting it used with other people, and having compassion, granting beingness to people and going, hey, wait a minute. He says, look, don't listen. When you see a situation, what products is this organization or this individual getting? Are they a decent person? That type of a thing. And you don't see that recognition. You don't see that recognition with people because they're so caught up on the first dynamic and that agreement that they get from other people in these cabals and these boards, these committees, and all this stuff. And nothing ever gets any better. It's just third dynamic individuation, both from the third dynamic and individuation from their real true third and fourth dynamics. That's the way I see it. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that if you were really about the expansion of the tech, then you would have to keep this reference in front of you at all times, like in what you're doing, right? Like if we were about really advancing the tech, LRH talks about this in the actual policy letter when he talks about contributions, and he said the contributions in forming the technology were the help for friendships and defense of organization, of dissemination, of application, of advices on results and of finance. So he acknowledges the help. He said these were great contributions and were and are appreciated. Many thousands contributed in this way and made us what we are. But notice this. He said discovery contribution was not, however, part of the broad picture. Discovery contribution was not a part of the broad picture. That ain't what we were looking for. Okay.
Right.
It says we would not speculate here on why this was so or how I came to rise above the bank. We're dealing only in facts, and the above is a fact. The group left to its own devices would not have evolved Scientology, but with wild dramatization of the bank called new ideas, in
Yep.
quotes, called new ideas, would have wiped it out. And so, what
And
are we doing?
here we are.
And here we go. The prophet known as LRH. It's like he prophesied this. Like he talked about how this is what would be a downfall if we don't keep this thing in, you know?
Right.
And so this is our ethics of saying like, yeah, if it's not right, it ain't right.
Yeah.
If it ain't working, it ain't working. If it ain't LRH, it ain't LRH.
Right. Look, don't listen.
Yeah.
What's going on? And that means getting out there, making yourself known. I think the most incredible and amazing thing to me is, and I've mentioned this before, and I see it now more than ever, is how somebody like AOGP can be reviled because we actually know how to market, and we're made wrong for marketing because it's like, oh, those guys, I hate them. They're slick advertising, and all this. It's just, what are you talking about?
I don't
You know?
understand what that means.
Yeah.
There's a whole there in the management volumes. There's whole things about advertising. Like I don't understand what that means.
Right. But see, they're not applying the technology. They're not applying the technology. PCs are scarce and students are scarce. It's really hard to hang out your own shingle and everything. And then you get these AOGP guys. Ah, gosh, can't stand them. What? That's
That how it sounds.
that's it's just laughable that somebody could have a problem with an organization that's trying to carry on LRH's legacy, the mantle of Scientology, the subject, as independent Scientology. But see and it all comes back to seeing that the technology is correctly applied. What all we can do is do podcasts, write posts, and things like that. We can't enforce anybody to do anything, but yet we have others trying to enforce things on us. What?
Mm.
It blows my mind. And that is the group bank agreement. Without getting in communication, without, forming some sort of a structure where everybody can get along and nobody's left behind. I hate to use that expression, but everybody is included, and you have a central organization that's willing to correct auditors, that's willing to help auditors. I mean, we don't see a lot of that at all because auditors won't go get correction from another organization. Well, I don't trust them. I don't know. I don't want to be told what to do. I'll just keep on doing what I'm doing. I mean, I get it, but it's not pro survival for the auditor or their PCs or anybody else that has to clean up their PCs later on, or their students. So how in the world are we ever supposed to actually expand the subject of independent Scientology when the viewpoint on it is I'd rather be an individual than I would be part of a group that includes everybody and applies the technology correctly and has compassion and understanding and says, okay, so what's going on here? What's your story? How do you do a clay demo? How do you do this? I mean, every time we get a new PC in, I find out what it is that they don't know. And I am blown the fuck away at especially from people from the church in the last two decades at least. What these people don't know as PCs and as students is mind blowing. If that's happening in the church, what's happening in the independent field? Well, we know that. And
Right.
and I have a problem with it, and that's why we're doing this podcast, is that you've got to apply it to yourself and find out what it is that you don't know. That's the hardest thing. Like Elric says, the hardest thing to spot is a missingness. This is what this podcast is about. The hardest thing to spot is a missingness. What is it that you're not applying? Is it that you have MUs, that you don't know about it, that it's okay to dog on other individuals, other groups? uh, all of this stuff is it's a misapplication of the technology, and if it wasn't going on, the field would be thriving from all of the people having the gains and wins that they could actually have.
That and that's the part that I think is so unfortunate. Regardless of like none of this, at least from my viewpoint, is not to be dogmatic, right? Like, you better do this or else, right? This is the only, da da da. Like, I'm not, there's nothing dogmatic from this viewpoint. What it's saying is that the gains and the wins that people are supposed to have with Scientology, and you were using independent Scientology, being able to do it for me, being able to do it from the comfort of my own home. It was huge for me, and I can't begin to express to you how important that was, because I lived a life where I work a lot, and I have, I live in a different part of the world where it's not class 8 auditor or whatever, class 12 auditor available to me. So all of these things were really, really important. But people not being able to get the gains that I know exist when this technology is used appropriately and correctly, when it's not squirreled and the whole bit, gosh, it's a good feeling to
Hmm.
just be able to be able to win at the level that I'm winning. And that feels really good. And so I want that for other people. I want other people to be able to experience these wins. I really do. And so if there's any squirreling, he says it. He says squirreling only comes, he said, going off into weird practices or altering Scientology only comes about from non-comprehension. Usually the non-comprehension is not of Scientology, but some earlier contact with an offbeat humanoid practice, which in its turn was not understood. And so somewhere this whole thing got all confused. And then you say, oh, and now Scientology comes up. I see this was actually that, and this was this, and now we can do this, and that's what it gets.
Right, but
No.
yeah, and it just doesn't stop there with the cognition, and you go, oh wow, the mass is keyed out, and I feel better. Okay, what are you going to do with that? What are you going to do with
Right.
that in perpetuity? You're going to put it into the future, and are you going to apply it, or does it just sit there as a key out, and then it keys back in and right back to your human-led
Hmm.
practice type of a thing? And that's the way that it looks. Is okay, you can have a cognition, but if you don't apply that cognition and use it, what good is it to you?
Right.
So yeah, that's where this is at, and I hope
Well,
this
well, well, well also,
illuminates
let me just say
people.
this too. Hmm. Let me just say this too, that what do you do with it especially if it's not something that is codified, if it's not something that is put in a position where now the next person can get that same win, right?
Right.
And what I love about LRH and what I love about the bridge and what I love about working as an independent Scientologist is that I know that it's laid out for people to travel this bridge, and it works as they're moving up the bridge and they're going through whatever, whatever. When that's altered, when that's thrown off, when that's put off on whatever level, to that degree, trouble comes in.
Hmm.
And we get a lot, believe me, when as sure as you hear the sound of my voice, we get a lot of people who have gotten into a lot of trouble when it comes to their spiritual case,
Hmm.
when it comes to their case, because it has been something has been incorrectly applied, something has been misunderstood or non-comprehension, something has gone off the rails somewhere, and it's gone into some stuff that has nothing to do with what we do as independent Scientologists in AOGP and how we're going to do it. And so what I'm saying that to say is that if you feel like you've had trouble with your case, if somewhere it's gotten bugged, if somewhere it's gotten stalled, if somewhere you're not getting the gains or you're not feeling it in your life, you should be having miracles for breakfast. It should feel that good.
Yeah.
Okay. And if it ain't fun, it ain't Scientology. So let's have fun with this, guys. Let's really enjoy our spiritual progress, and let it feel good to you as you have these wins. And to the degree that it's not feeling good, life is not going the way you want it, know that there is a technology that can help you get that right. Okay. And if it's applied, and if it's applied correctly, okay, it will work.
Yeah.
And we're here to see that that happens.
Yeah. And when in doubt, communicate. Don't just take
Come on.
some information from somebody and you go, so that doesn't sound right because I'm seeing something else. Why in the world don't you get in touch with the other person or the organization or whatever and find out for yourself what's going on and expand your understanding of a situation? Because if it's persisting, there's a lie behind it somewhere. And the only way to find that lie is to get in communication, whether it's with the tech or an organization or a person or what have you. And if you're not doing that, you're not applying the absolute basics of Scientology and Dianetics. And it needs to start happening. Get in communication, broaden your comm line, care about what's going on in your community, care about another person, you know, care about the technology and get on a course, get in session. That's the only way that technology can be correctly applied is by getting in communication. And that's the only solution. So
I love it.
I got to get in session with a PC. I hope everybody enjoyed this podcast. Please feel free to comment on it in beneath the video on YouTube.
Yeah,
Get in
comment. Talk
get
to
in
us.
touch.
Let us know what you're really into.
Yeah, get in touch with us, and you can email us, or you can talk to Finn, our AI platform, on ao-gp.org and the College of Independent Scientology.com. And let's talk. Let's get you moving up the bridge. So for Quentin and
Love it.
myself, we hope you enjoyed this podcast. Namaste, and we love you. Bye-bye.
Peace.